All right, everyone. We'll hopefully get started in probably a minute or two. Just give more people to funnel in. Uh, Everyone in the chat, do we sound good? Do we look good? Yes. Thank you, Ed. Especially since I am playing George today. Want to make sure that everything is good. Okay. I think that should be enough. Welcome everyone to today's EU version of Kubernetes Office Hours, where we answer your user questions live on the air with our esteemed panel of experts. You can find us in hashtag office hours on Slack and check the topic for the URL for the event information. Before we begin, let's start by introducing ourselves. I'm your host, Jeffrey Sika. I'm playing George Castro today. And we'll begin with our panel. Panelists, if you please, let's start with Bob.
Hi, I'm Bob Killen. I work with Jeff, who's probably just to the left of me. Both of us work for the University of Michigan in the Advanced Research Computing and Technical Services Department. Our experience is pretty much in Kubernetes on-prem. He's a bit more experienced in jobs. I'm a bit more the networking and other guy.
All right. Puya?
Hi, I'm Puya Bassi, working for Giant Swarm as a developer advocate, mainly focusing on security and auth, but basically general questions around Azure, AWS, and on-prem installations. Ilya?
Ilya. Well, Ilya can introduce himself when he gets back. All right, so before we start, here are the ground rules. This is a judgment-free zone. Everyone had to start from somewhere, so please help everyone out by having a supportive environment in the channel. Oh, Ilya. I'm going to go through the ground rules and then you can do your introductions. While we do our best to answer your questions, the panel doesn't have access to your cluster, so live debugging is off topic, but we will do our best to get you moving down the next step of debugging. Audience, you can help out by pasting URLs to official docs or blogs or anything that might be relevant to the topic at hand in the Slack channel. Post your questions to Discuss or Stack Overflow. Especially if it has like large logs that you want us to look at. Don't flood Slack with those. Stack Overflow or Discuss is a much better venue. You can also help out by tweeting and spreading the word and paying it forward, letting everyone know that this is going on and we're here to help. Each session is recorded and available on YouTube, so if you're using this as a work resource, please let us know how we're doing so we can try and make it better. If you want to sit on this panel and spread your knowledge, you are more than welcome to, and you can earn a famous water bottle, which I don't have because I'm not George. You can help us take notes. I will link the HackMD link in the chat right now. So please help us take notes. We're also always looking for marketing help, so if you're awesome at social media, please help us out, because me personally, I'm not. We will also be holding a raffle for the audience with a t-shirt, eventually Kubernetes fidget spinners and all sorts of cool stuff, so it pays to come back. At the end of this, I will pick someone at random who's asked a question in chat, and they will, once George gets back, get a coupon code to the CNCF store so they can get a Kubernetes shirt. And lastly, feel free to hang out in hashtag office hours afterwards. So if the other channels are a bit too busy for you and you're looking for a friendly home or a place to ask questions, you're more than welcome to pull up a chair and hang out. And with that, let's get started. Now I gotta scroll up.
Give Ilya a sec.
Oh, yeah, Ilya. I'm
He needs to
sorry.
introduce himself.
Ilya,
Paul.
please.
I'm Ilya from VWorks. I've been involved with C cluster lifecycle in the past, and originally one day I wrote kubeadmin. But more recently, I've been focusing on the developer use cases, application developer use cases for Kubernetes, and how do developer tools adapt to Kubernetes, or whether there are some go-in-between tools for making Kubernetes easier to use with IDEs and CI systems, etc. So these are the kind of things that I've been focusing on recently. Yeah, I've also been working on EKS Scroll, which is a tool that makes EKS very easy to use.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so we so far have one question that's from the Office Hours chat, and the rest we've scraped from novice and users. So Surya Prakash, I'm bad with names, asked, "Hello all. We have only one namespace in our Kubernetes cluster. We have all the firewalls, NSGs set up at VM level to allow deny connections. We have 5 different pods deployed to this namespace. Do you think creating Kubernetes network policies will have additional security on top of the existing firewalls NSGs applied at the infrastructure level?"
I can take that. I'd definitely say there is a benefit, because like this, like you have right now, you have trust inside your network, but no trust outside. That's kind of the first level of defense. However, at some point, if you have someone breaking out from the inside, from like a pod, then they have full control over everything, at least network-wise. So adding network policies on that layer would at least limit the pod outbreak to a single route that is allowed, or single routes that are allowed, instead of the whole network.
Awesome. Anyone else?
Well, I guess just a quick sort of example for that would be like, let's say you have your database server and then you have an API server that's like in front of it. Really, you just want the API server to be the only thing talking to the database. You don't want any of your pods in your namespace to be able to talk to it directly. So putting your network policies in place really helps limit that scope.
Awesome. So next question, we're going to move on to some questions from the Novice channel. Ed in Novice asked, "When I do minikube start, I get this error. Error starting host, temporary error, error configuring auth on host, OS type not recognized," with some other info of the minikube version and the system version, which is Mac OS. Anyone know what could have possibly gone wrong?
I haven't seen that particular error. I've seen a lot of minikube errors, especially on Mac, because I use a Mac, but I haven't used that one. The first question would be what kind of driver he uses, and I had best experience with HyperKit. So the HyperKit driver would be what also Docker for Mac would use, and the Kubernetes in there. So that's for me, it was usually the most stable and best working driver. Other than that, I would basically file an issue. Maybe try the new version. There's 0.28.1 out, if I remember correctly. And otherwise, I would file an issue in the minikube repo.
Awesome.
Yeah, it looks like there's actually an issue already for that. I'll link it here. There we go. The other, like, if Minikube is having a lot of problems, you can nuke your, Minikube directory, .hb or home directory .minikube, and that can sometimes clear up issues.
Right. This
Oh.
seems to be a Docker machine error or something.
Hey, Eeyore.
Hey folks, how are you?
Eeyore. Nice.
Good.
Are you here to grace us with panel expertise? If so, please introduce yourself.
My name is Sihar Duretsky. I'm a developer advocate at CNCF, and I'm happy to see you all here.
Awesome. All right, moving on to the next question from Kubernetes Novice. Sohel2020 asked, My organization is heavily using Kubernetes, but we're currently using customized tools using Ansible and Horizon to provision Kubernetes. But we've decided to move to kops managed cluster. But no one is concerned of how we migrate our existing cluster and workload or migrate our existing cluster into kops. It would be really helpful if you can give us any ideas or share any blog posts.
I'm not sure where they're setting up the cluster, but for kind of the lift and shift from one to another cluster, we've seen a lot of use of Heptio Arc, ARK. Someone can paste that in the chat. That works really nice. If there's data involved, it works even on, I think, AWS and Azure. Can snapshot your volumes and reconstruct that. If you're on some other cloud or on-premise, that might not be possible. You would need to think about some data moving there. But at least for the workloads, it should work on any cluster.
Yeah, I could just add to that essentially you could consider using kubectl get export on each of your workloads, and then dumping that to a file. And I would rather dump it to a repo and then deploy that using either kubectl apply from a repo or using potentially a GitOps kind of approach with an operator. But the limitation of that is that it wouldn't pick up your volumes, right? So if you do have volumes, Heptio comes quite handy. But broadly, what I really wanted to say is that really not treating the cluster as the source of truth for all of your workloads, and putting workloads in Git is a much better idea for all these cases.
Definitely. Like if you have some declarative version of your manifests in a Git, for example, the best would be just to reapply them on a clean slate and not like pull them down from one cluster and pull them up in the other.
Awesome.
Unfortunately, there really isn't a good option to at least lift and shift the data itself. That's sort of going to be, what are you doing with Horizon? I'm assuming it's OpenStack Horizon, so you might be able to take a dump of the disk. But either way, you're going to have to do like a manual import and attach.
All right. Next question is from Ed. I've just entered the Kubernetes world. Welcome. And I have some Docker Vagrant experience. So is running the command below similar to starting a container in Docker? And it's kubectl run hello minikube, specifies an image flag, and then specifies a port. What would be a close analogy to a Vagrant Docker use case?
Not sure about the analogy there, but run the kubectl run command is definitely something that was kind of meant to be similar to Docker run. However, as far as I know, it creates a deployment, so it's not an ephemeral container what you get. Like if the container dies, it will be restarted because you get what I think would be a deployment.
Yeah, that's correct. It creates deployment. So I'm not sure about the direct comparison with Docker Vagrant, but it may be really closer to Docker run something or Docker machine run something. I'm not sure about Vagrant, so from my perspective here, Vagrant is a totally different story.
Yeah, kind of Vagrant predates much of Kubernetes in a lot of ways, and predates Docker too. It just happened to be around early on when there weren't good solutions for Docker and desktop, so people used Vagrant a lot. But I think Vagrant kind of becomes mostly irrelevant as such. It filled a gap at the time, but now it's kind of pretty much irrelevant. And it's, and if you say Docker Vagrant, it's kind of like basically you can really go wild there's just about anything that you can do because Vagrant allows you to just about anything really.
One little kind of the difference between like kubectl run and what you can do with like Docker run is with Docker run, you can actually like expose the service directly just by mapping through the port. In Kubernetes, you actually have to run a second command, and that's either creating your manifest and applying it or using, I think it's a kubectl expose. And then you give it the name of the deployment that you specified and supply the port, and it'll automatically expose it that way.
All right. Moving on. Marco A. Morales asks, I'm trying to have a peered VPC in AWS be able to reach the Kube API in the Kubernetes VPC. I was thinking of setting up an internal ELB that has all the master nodes in it. Does that sound like a good idea? What would be the best way to do this? Should I do this with a simple service object? Or maybe this is something that I should tackle from COPS? So that's kind of a few questions that all, I think, lead to the same.
Like an internal ELB is definitely not a bad idea. For peer VPCs, that works. We have that at a few customers in action. The best way to create that, I'm not sure how COPS handles or manages the masters. If they're actually inside of, if they're self-hosted, you might be able to use a service object, but I would maybe go for something. I'm not sure COPS has that directly inbuilt, but I would go with like a ELB just in front of all the masters.
Doesn't COPS put an ELB in front of the masters anyway? Or are we talking about ALB instead of ELB?
Yeah, right. You just would need to change it to internal, I think. There is one anyway, right?
All right. Anything else?
I mean, I don't know. I've been thinking about EKS a lot, so don't ask me about it. Yeah, I can see how some people still want to use COPS, and I mean, this could be a little easier with EKS, I suppose. Because actually in EKS, it's actually quite a bit. No, it's relevant. Sorry, let's leave that.
All right, moving on. Kulti, or Kult, asks, hi, I'm very new to Kubernetes. What is the simplest way to have two services talking to one another in a cluster? So far, I've created a service and exposed it over a node port, but basically I need to have an API base URL, quote unquote, for another service to call it. I don't want to set up an external load balancer if I don't have to. No one on the internet needs to be able to access these services who isn't another service in the cluster. I've seen here on Quora references to things of the format penguin-service.svc.hosted-apps.cluster.local. What is that? I haven't come across that until now. Do I need to figure out what the format of that is and how to use that?
All right. So in most clusters, you should have DNS running. I rarely have seen a cluster that doesn't have DNS. And usually the DNS is bootstrapped by the Kubernetes API. So any service that you create will have an internal service name. And what you see there is usually how this kind of service looks like. So it's service name.svc.namespace, and then the base domain of your cluster, which is usually cluster.local, but could be different. You could leave that out, the last part, because it's anyway in a search domain. So having service name.svc.namespace name would suffice. If you're inside a namespace, you can just use the service name. So that's how the resolve conf is usually put up in a pod. Most probably that will solve your problem.
If it helps, I've linked the service documentation in Office Hours.
Awesome. Anything else to add? All right. Oh, I love this username. TVH asks, is there a way to set limits on nodes?
Like number of nodes or something else?
Number of pods on a node. I know you can set the max pod count.
It's always set. It's like 110 or something by default.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you would want if you want to put a quota on a node would be create a namespace that has that node exclusively, and then you could put a quota on that namespace. But I don't really see why you would want to have less than node resources available for for stuff that gets scheduled to that node. Usually you would just limit based on namespaces, both resources and number of pods. And I think by now you can limit quite a lot of things. Should be a list in the documentation.
I mean, maybe this is the kind of question where they're thinking they need some spare resources on all the nodes to run some processes on the host outside of Kubernetes. Maybe this is the type of question, but I'm not entirely sure.
If it's like that, I would maybe look into pod preemption and priorities. There is also ways to have C-group limits on a node set on the kubelet. There is actually quite a lot of things, so that's quite advanced Kubernetes things. Not sure if you want to go into that, but if you want to go into it, I would look at a lot of docs and then make a plan, kind of start with one thing, try it out, and if it still breaks your node or your nodes get overloaded, then add the next layer and add the next layer. We've been rabbit holing on these kind of issues a lot. So you never know what is kind of working right. And there is, because most of these things are still a bit early, still a bit like new and fresh in Kubernetes. Some of them might work a bit differently to what you expect them to work.
Awesome. Next question is Klavs Klavson. I can't start new pods, core DNS and kube system, or just a busybox. Creating them fails with network plugin CNI failed to set up pod, network unauthorized. And in the access log on the Kube API server, I see authentication go, unable to authenticate the request due to an error, invalid bearer token, invalid bearer token. Token has been invalidated. But if I describe the pod in question, describe the secret, and try to curl with that to f.ex/API, I get a fine response, and without a bearer token, I get an unauthorized. So I was hoping someone could give me some hints as to what I could try next and figure out why these pods fail.
That sounds like there was a problem with the creation of your networking driver itself, like a service account wasn't created or an RBAC policy itself wasn't created.
Yeah, we would need more information about which network plugin is used, which CNI, on what kind of infrastructure. Most probably there's something wrong with how the CNI is set up, and it shouldn't be the API server doing much. It's mainly the kubelet working on that. So maybe there's also something wrong between kubelet and API server if there's auth errors there, or they're just not related to each other.
Also in the chat regarding the last question, Joel Speed asks, would kube reserved be useful for the previous question? It allows you to reduce the amount of allocatable resources on each kubelet. For example, reserve 200 M CPUs on a 2 CPU box, so only 1800 M is allocatable. I think so.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think the best documentation on reserved and capacity flags is still the main issue that was created. I think it was with Kubernetes 1.3, covering all that stuff.
All right, this is going to be an interesting one to pronounce. Gisselbert asks, a quick question. Can network policies be used to restrict access to a set of pods within a particular namespace?
I think that should work. Bit rusty on my network policies, but set of pods, you basically select pods by labels, so it shouldn't really matter if you want to have them selected over namespaces or in a single namespace.
Yes, I can do this. So as far as I remember, it's one of the major design features of network policy. It is, so it should be fine.
There's really nice documentation written by Ahmed from Google. That's kind of my favorite network policy documentation nowadays. Really nice examples also on GitHub. I looked that up. Yeah.
Yeah, Ahmed writes very good blog posts, definitely. All topics that he covers.
All right. Next question comes from Ketchup Monkey. Sorry to bother you, but I am in my worker node. Is there any idea where I can see the logs to kubelet? I'm running Kubernetes on CoreOS. And I'm pretty sure that would just be journal control, like journal CTL. Kubelet. Well, -xe kubelet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it should be. The unit is something called kubelet.service usually.
Yeah.
So if you do that, that will give you all the logs that you should be able to see. Another weird hacky thing that I do is just running journal CTL and then like piping it to grep and looking for cube and then seeing everything that's happening, because there's some times where that'll actually give you more information on the error, or you'll see more effects of what's going on. Vince MD asks, there is a log dump that I'm going to paste in the chat quick. Can someone help me with the above? The Kubernetes doc on ImageFS based eviction is not clear for me. I would be interested to know how ImageFS is defined. Does it have a specific size? My pods get evicted, unfortunately. We're using roughly 30% of the node disk space, but it looks like the node file system is not the issue, and the image file system is the problem. I have no idea where ImageFS is defined and mounted and used. We run a Flink task manager which processes a lot of data, and it's a Kubernetes deployment with no volume attached apart from the Kubernetes config map. We use kubeAWS in AWS to run Kubernetes.
So ImageFS is probably what is basically varlib Docker, right?
Yeah, right.
Probably.
Yeah. It
should be varlib Docker, and it shouldn't kill your pod. It's basically just cleaning up the image file system, the cached images in your Docker directory.
Yeah, my best guess is that they're processing data within the container, and so that's filling it up more and triggering the attempt at eviction.
Yeah, it depends also on how big varlib Docker is, and if you have like an extra volume with it. Oftentimes, if you're on a cloud, you have like an extra EBS volume for varlib Docker, and you also get logs into that. So that volume might fill up based on different things. So if you have something logging erroneously into the Docker file system, then that might influence your image file system limits too.
All right, awesome. Vinay Vinama, yeah, I think that's it. Hi, I have a Node.js app running in a container, and I wanted to connect this container to my local Mongo instance. Is this possible? So the first thing that comes to mind for me is something like telepresence.
Yeah, it depends on where that comes. Like if it's Minikube, you could create like an external service that you can talk to through Minikube, but you would need to set up some networking between the VM and your local machine. Telepresence is a good thing. You need to somehow expose your machine.
Yeah.
That's or use ngrok or something.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be simpler to just make Mongo run inside of Kubernetes?
Definitely.
Yep.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like the right thing to do. And using telepresence isn't something that I'd really recommend to a beginner, honestly. I think telepresence is pretty useful if you know what you use it for and how you use it. And if you know your networking, your Kubernetes stuff, then for sure. But, otherwise, it can be tricky. Like in case if you get any error conditions or whatever, like you're probably completely lost. And with telepresence, you would have to actually move your MongoDB into another process. So you wouldn't be able to just use the running process there. Otherwise, yeah, expose it to the internet and then use it that way, or the local network. Then yeah, the easiest thing is to run it in a container. Really. There is a MongoDB image, and it should be doable to restore the database into a container. You don't even need to set up volumes for local development.
Nope. And I'm pretty sure there's a decent Helm chart out for Mongo as well, if they eventually want to try and migrate into their cluster.
Yeah, there's even Mongo operators by now. I think there's an upstream one or like an official one by some company even.
All right. We are starting to run out of questions. We're doing too well. David Rama asks, "Hi all, I have a Kubernetes cluster running on bare metal. I can't get access to the dashboard event even using the kubectl proxy command. It seems to be a networking issue running Calico. Where do you recommend I look to track my problem? I get a gitsock opt connection timed out error each time. I did try to run another service to see and had the same issue while trying to access the cluster IP port URL."
This looks to me like a connection issue between the master and the workers, because you usually, if you proxy, you should most probably even get the same error if you try kubectl logs, and that usually shows that you're going that you have some problem getting from the master to the workers. Not really sure where you would want to look like it. I mean, you can start looking at Calico logs. Not sure if you're running Calico inside the cluster or outside, but it might also be networking below that layer, below the Calico layer. Not sure if you use Flannel below that on-premise or you have something connecting your machines directly. I would try getting basic host-to-host access, testing that, and then going layer by layer up, kind of, and trying kind of like on a very low level, maybe with a busy box or some tooling container to ping the hosts. Don't ping cluster IPs from outside; they're virtual. Not sure anything else.
Just a quick thing on the cluster IP stuff. You can, like, my go-to tool since ping won't work is netcat and going to the explicit port that's exposed. But yeah, what you suggest is pretty much how I would go about it.
Anything else? All right, we are, believe it or not, out of questions. So if you have any questions and you're listening, please hop into Slack or even pop them into the YouTube live stream chat and we will try and answer them. In the meantime, has anyone here heard about the problems trying to pull 1.11 images? There are a bunch of people that are trying to bootstrap or upgrade using kubeadm, and kubeadm can't find the Docker images.
Those hypercube images, or?
I don't know. They're talking about it a lot in SIG release.
And like, does it work for some people and doesn't work for some other people, or does it not work for anyone? Or does it only work for Googleers, or does it only work for?
They are trying to pull K8's GCRIO Kube API server v111.1.
Well, let me try to pull that myself.
Never used those images.
Yeah.
I haven't upgraded to 111 yet.
And speaking of
Testing.
111, there is a changelog that we could potentially talk about to try and fill some time as more people try and ask questions.
And 1.11.1 is out just a few days ago.
Yep.
Not even a few days ago, right?
1.11.1 is very, very fresh.
Yeah.
It was cut.
Like during the last 24 hours.
Yeah, 18
Yeah.
hours. 18 hours ago.
Feels like such a long time.
Hot out of the CI system.
Ed.Packet asks, question for the channel. What are the plans for multi-architecture clusters in 1.12, and where are the critical pieces that someone might work on in the next release cycle?
You've been working on this.
I want to touch on this since I've been working in Dashboard a lot. So Dashboard already publishes different containers depending on the architecture, but they weren't publishing manifests. So hopefully in the next release, if not the next release, the release after that, you'll just be able to pull Kubernetes-dashboard, and then it will work regardless of your architecture. Conceivably, that would also work for other containers within Kubernetes. I just don't know if they're actually publishing manifests for them all. And then, yeah. Does somebody else know? Guess not. Critical pieces. Oh, sorry, I was reading your answer. So critical pieces, again, I don't know if other aspects of the project are publishing manifests that, create multi-architecture images. Part of the problem is in order to push multi-architecture images, you have to, if you're using Docker, run Docker manifest, and that's still considered an experimental CLI feature. However, older versions of the Docker client can pull them without a problem. It's just pushing them that's an experimental feature, which is kind of weird. I do know that GCR and Docker Hub and a lot of the big public registries support the 2.2 manifests, which support multi-architecture. But as far as like places where you might be able to work on it for the next release cycle, I'm kind of rooted in SIG UI, so I don't know where else you could look.
Is the pause container ready for multi-architecture? That would be pretty central.
That is a good question.
So we had lots of issues moving to China with the pause container being on Google.
And the key thing with multi-arch images is if you're already building like AMD, let's just say AMD 64 and ARch 64, if you're just building those two containers, building the multi-arch container is just building a giant JSON file and pushing that up to the hub. Because all it is a manifest that says, oh, you're looking for this architecture, go over here.
It's a pointer.
It is literally a pointer. It's a symlink to, hey, go to this thing. So I can't imagine that we're not that far away from it. The big thing is I don't think the main repos are going to do it until it's not an experimental feature to push. Because you have to enable the experimental feature when you're pushing. Do we have any other questions? Not yet. So, big changes in 1.11.1. There is a few actions required. One thing is it removes defaulting of the CSI file system to ext4. All the production drivers listed under the CSI drivers were inspected and should not be impacted after this change. If you're using a driver not in the list, please test the driver on an updated test cluster first. Next, Kube API Server, the priority admission plugin is now enabled by default when using enable admission plugins. If using the admission control flag to fully specify the set of admission plugins, the priority admission plugin should be added if using the pod priority feature, which is enabled by default in 1.11. That was a mouthful. And the last big action required is the system node critical and the system cluster critical priority classes are now limited to the kube system namespace by the pod priority admission plugin. So it seems like a lot of cleanup around admission controls.
Yeah, stuff is moving a bit. So if you move to the new flags, you're good. If you're on the old flags, you still need to set a few things. Don't remember if there is much more. There was, I think this was for 1.11.1. There was more for 1.11, I think, below.
Yeah. This is sort of a general question, but has anyone played around with the IPVS mode yet for kube proxy?
I really want to.
Same.
Reading so much about it. They say it scales a lot better. So if you have tons of services, and I have, I think, 1 or 2 customer clusters that have like huge amounts of services. They run like tons of CI in there. Those, I think, are sped up quite nicely. Depends on the networking you're using, I guess. If you're using Cilium anyway, you're not using kubeproxy in that way, and you don't need the IPVS anyway. So I might just skip it and move to Cilium.
It's what we use in production here.
Yeah.
Been quite happy with it. I'm also a big eBPF fan.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
I'm just going through other notable changes it could be fun to talk about. So 1.11.1 updated Go to use Go 1.10.3. I'm actually surprised that's in a minor release like that. But that's just me. Ed
I'll also take a few questions from Discuss.
Ah, yes. And Ed has linked Cilium info in the chat. So let me hop over to Discuss. So our Hugga asks on Discuss, question about etcd cluster with kube ADM in 1.11. I'm trying to deploy an etcd cluster using this procedure, and then he links to something that I will... Thank you.
I linked it in Slack.
Okay, perfect. The procedure appears to work. However, I noticed that all the etcd nodes are only listening on localhost. The procedure says to verify cluster health using the IP address of host 0, which fails because it's not listening on the public address. If I replaced host 0 with localhost, the health check completes and shows the cluster is healthy. So is the procedure bugged? How would a Kubernetes cluster communicate with this etcd cluster only listening on localhost?
So looking at the documentation there, host 0 is like at the little top. It's given an explicit IP. So
I think it's just that the health check is not described
probably
well.
running without the top part. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just listening on localhost, which is okay because you don't need to expose your etcd. And what it most probably does is that the etcds are running next to the masters, so each master can talk to its local etcd. I guess that's what the procedure does. I'm not very deep into kubeadm.
I do not like all the etcd instances do have to talk to each other to maintain quorum. So let's see.
You want me to move on, Bob, or are you digging?
I'll dig through this a little bit, but I'd say move on. We can come back.
Okay. Theroth posted in Discuss, non-persistent mount. Hello, I have many cron jobs which include Sakuli tests. Now I have a production and a test and assuming environment. So I created a little tool that replaces all variables in code with the right string so that I can change the URLs and so on. The problem is when I change it, it will stay. Is there any possible solution to do it with a non-consistent volume? My idea is a mount that works like a normal mount, but that changes in the container will not give it to the host. Are there any other solutions? I will manipulate my tests with different URLs on different production states, and I think that's the best solution to go on. So I'm pretty sure that I think there's a better way to template this out than having something that does like a string replace like that.
Yeah, you should try not to keep configuration inside the code, but have it as variables, maybe populated through a config file or environment variable.
Right.
And then you could use config maps to configure that in your different environments. Not sure about the specific use case here, because there's some interaction between like host and container level.
Yeah, I think we need a little more information to give a better answer. All right, let's move on. BLNR102 asked, the title is Shutdown and Restore Cluster Automatically. Hi all, as we want to save money for a test cluster, we want to be able to shut down the cluster when we go home and restore it again on the next day. Do you know any best practices on how to do that? The more automatic the solution is, the better it is, of course. Currently we use kops to provision the cluster and deploy the applications manually. My first thought is to continue using kops for provisioning and maybe Helm for deploying everything in one chart. My second thought is to create a snapshot of the cluster state from the etcd cluster, persist it on an object storage, and then when I create the cluster again, the master should take the can take the snapshot and load it into the new etcd cluster. Do you have any other ideas?
I actually had a feature request like this recently. Yeah, there is a few ways you would do that. I mean, you could scale down the cluster to 0 or a single node to save some money. About saving the state, if you just want data that's in etcd, then maybe similar to what Ilya said to the question before, keeping your manifests in a Git and applying it just to the new cluster every morning would be more efficient than trying to get like a backup and then restore it to the cluster the next morning. You might want to have just some automation around it. So if you really tear down the whole cluster, you don't want to keep kind of the control plane alive, then you want to have some automation that the cluster comes up, I don't know, at 7 a.m., bootstraps at 7:30, and then at 8 a.m. your workers can use it again. Seen some people automated stuff with that, like Terraform, or know what you want to use there.
Awesome. Anyone else have anything to add?
Sorry,
You were muted.
muted. So I was saying, yeah, a colleague of mine worked on something similar. Let me just look it up. Yeah, so this could be of interest. Cube start stop. It's called. Take a look. A colleague of mine, Lily, she worked on that. I think it's pretty cool, actually. It's about similar kind of things too. Yeah, it's you can define your working hours and scale cluster up and down.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's super handy.
Yeah, another suggestion that Ed pointed out is this could also be another Heptio Arc solution, you know, being able to back up the cluster, destroy it, and then restore it the next day. Or just be some automation around running it and then restoring it. Next question is titled Kubernetes Secrets versus HashiCorp Azure Vault by Rehan Saeed. Yeah. I'm migrating from Docker Swarm where secrets were immutable and could not be updated. This made them a pain to deploy. Is that also the case with Kubernetes? Ideally, I just want an idempotent apply script. I've also read that Kubernetes secrets are just a minimum bar for security and that ideally you should use a dedicated secret store like Azure Key Vault or HashiCorp Vault, but you need a secret to access those services, so presumably that secret would be stored in a Kubernetes secret. Finally, I'd also like to know whether it's recommended to use secrets exposed as volumes or environment variables.
That's a really nice topic. Actually, I don't think secrets are that insecure anymore. At least when we rewrote the CIS benchmark, I think since 1.9, you can use back then there was an alpha feature, encryption at rest, to encrypt secrets also in etcd. On the nodes they kept in TempFS anyway, so they're pretty much secure enough to run. If you really want to go further, you could go with something like HashiCorp, and yeah, you still need to somehow keep either the token you use for HashiCorp for Vault in a secret, or you use a different authentication method. Like if you're on Azure, you can use the machine auth. If you're on AWS, there's also an EC2 auth mechanism. We use that sometimes. Or you would use, I think there is a Kubernetes auth backend or engine. Not sure what the terminology in Vault is again. But it's not very nicely documented yet, at least last time I checked.
Yeah, I just want to add, I mean, I would think twice before introducing Vault, definitely. It is a nice system, but it's probably as complex as Kubernetes itself. So if you want to double up on the complexity, sure thing. And then now there are like hosted options for storage, and maybe that makes things easier. I think you can use Vault with like GCP backend, and there are other backends that you don't have to run the underlying data store. But I still think, yeah, please do think twice when you do that. And the Kubernetes secrets had become much more secure in the recent releases. It's like up until, I don't know, a year ago, so before they introduced encryption at rest and at CD, then there was some debates about Kubernetes secrets not being real secrets, but that issue had been fixed. And there are some specific use cases where a system like Vault is very handy, but if you're not a very large enterprise and you see that Vault complexity isn't something that you really have to have, then I wouldn't recommend it. There are ways to store secrets in encrypted form in a Git repository and use that with GitOps. There's an operator by Bitnami called Self Secrets, and I'll share a link to more information on that shortly. But yeah, essentially, you don't really have to bind to the whole model Vault because it's very complex, really.
Yeah, also there is some work, I think with 1.11, there is alphas of that where the secret engine does support different backends. I think Vault will be one of the first that is supported. Maybe in the next KubeCons or some blogs in the next 6 to 12 months will shed some light on how to use that. I haven't looked into it yet that much, but that's kind of like on a roadmap for secrets in the future.
Yeah.
To have like automatic rotation there and support different backends like Vault or something like KMS in AWS or Key Vault in Azure. I would be careful to use just one cloud solution if you're not married to that cloud already. Bob, sorry.
It's okay. I believe there's actually, and I think it's in beta right now, an encryption config that can use an external KMS provider. Let's see if I can find that really quick. There we go. I linked a link to it in chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. Anything else to add? All right, I think that's going to do it for us for the EU version of Kubernetes Office Hours. Thanks to the following companies for supporting the community with developer volunteers. Giant Swarm, Heptio, LiquaWeb, Red Hat, Weaveworks, the University of Michigan, and Packet.net, and the CNCF. Thanks to Google for sponsoring the shirts that I will get to in a second. We're going to hold a raffle for the audience with shirts and other cool stuff. Unfortunately, I can't pick one because I'm on my Windows machine, and my Windows machine just does gaming, so it doesn't have Python. So right after I finish streaming, I will go through and run a Python script to figure out who got the shirt that George will send a code for once he gets back. So please keep coming back. You may have a chance to get a shirt. Lastly, feel free to hang out and hashtag office-hours afterwards. If the other channels are too busy for you and you're looking for a nice friendly home and you have questions, you're more than welcome to pull up a chair and hang out. And with that, thank you panelists for having a wonderful Kubernetes Office Hours July version. Oh, were there any other
Thank you.
announcements? Any other announcements? Thank you, Bob.
Oh yeah, I thought if you don't mind, I could pitch my blog post really briefly. A lot of people have been asking me about
Do it.
Do it.
GitOps and how is GitOps different from what everyone else does. And I wrote this blog post that talks very specifically about how GitOps is a better way to deploy to Kubernetes than comparing to a kind of standard way where a CI job runs like kubectl set image or something similar. So I've described that in detail in my blog post, which I have a link for. I was supposed to have that handy already, but I lost it. Excuse me. /blog. Yeah, it's this one. I could share my screen very briefly.
You have it in the chat at.
Oh yeah, oh brilliant, thank you. Yeah, so it's currently the latest article in our blog, and yeah, essentially you're talking about how deploying directly from CI is an answer pattern, and all the downsides of that, and along with some examples and diagrams. So do take a look, and hit me up on Slack if you have any thoughts on this topic. And I mean, there's a workaround for that. You could say like there's some few limitations that you work around by putting CI directly into the cluster, but there are still a number of issues with that, and this is what this blog post discussed. And it's fairly short and straightforward, really. So yeah, if you have any thoughts, if you agree, disagree, just hit me up on Slack.
Awesome. Thank you, Ilya. And with that, I think we will end the EU version. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks panel for helping out.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks,
See you around.